just doing things, but the kids came down, and then I went upstairs because I missed some of them, and didn't realize we had two other students that had birthdays today. So just a lot of birthdays on September the 6th. I appreciate that. I was just trying to look around and see whose house we could go to for ice cream and cake after this is over, but I'm not sure any of you would be. You all are saying your house, right? Genesis chapter 43. Now, I know some of you, the last 8 to 10 weeks, have not been with us. And before I start, I want you to watch this little video, and it was supposed to be during the announcements. And Isaiah did what I asked him to do. He reminded me. He's got a big word back up there going, video, video, video. So watch this right quick. It's just a brief about something coming up on September the 17th. So watch this. Over the last few years, we have registered for this really for free. People that Google our church can find it on the map. It's actually National Back to Church Sunday. We know that that's something we should have a part of our lives every Sunday, but it is a good time to advertise getting back in church. People have been gone for the summer, or maybe not every Sunday, but vacation school is back. And it's a great time to emphasize, especially inviting your friends, neighbors, co-workers, not just new people that don't go to church, but I want you to just think about the people you go to church with that might have just sort of not been as faithful. It's a great time to contact them and say, hey, we have missed you. It's not a time to go, well, it's not a time to call them and say, it's going to be a blue moon, you show up for church, That's not what we want to do. We want to encourage them to be in church. And so invite somebody. I realize it is important for vocational pastors and things to be involved in inviting people to church. But do you know that 82% of people that go to church for the first time say they went because a friend invited them? Only 6% said they went because a pastor invited them. They expect it from the pastor. They sometimes don't expect it from their friends. And so we all should do that. I'm thankful for the 6%, but I'm real thankful for the 82%. And so think of somebody, walk over to your neighbor's house. Neighbors are sort of, most of us live probably in a neighborhood. And I know, neighbors are not the same today. A lot of people are scared of their neighbors. They never met them. I can remember my mom saying, go over to this house and I've already called, they got a couple of eggs for you and a cup of sugar. We hear those stories. I experienced that. Our neighbors, look, my neighbors had permission to, probably, I know it's probably not a good practice, but if I was in trouble and I was in a neighbor's yard, I didn't have to wait till mom and daddy got outside. The neighbors, they were that close. Well, I know we live in a different culture, but there are people that will respond to an invite. And so I hope that you will consider finding somebody, praying about somebody, a coworker, to come to church. Our Know Your Community that Dr. Eddie Moody did with us Do you know about 62 to 63% of the people in Chesapeake within a 10-minute drive of our church do not go to anywhere on Sunday morning? 62 to 64% go nowhere. And even though we've got a lot of churches, they're not going. And so there's lots of people to invite. We have a special guest speaker that day. Dr. David Crow will be with us from North American Missions. We'll be having an evening service at 5 o'clock. He will be preaching so almost like a one-day revival with us that Sunday. And so I hope that you'll be a part of that and try to mark your calendar and invite somebody. All right. For those of you who have not been in here over the last few weeks, we have been continuing in the book of Genesis. It is hard to believe that I have been in the book of Genesis almost a year, but it's a long book, and to really get the gist of it, you have to spend some time in it. And we've broken up some things, with other special times and that kind of thing, but I want to remind you all of the breakdown of Genesis for those of you who are joining us tonight, and will probably go through the rest of Genesis with us, even though it will not take 6 months to go through the last eight chapters. The story of Genesis is broken up into, you can break it up into 2 or 3 sections. I choose to break it up into 3. One is the primeval history of Genesis 1 through 11. What you find there is the creation, the flood, you find the fall, you find all of that. And it's really the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that follow that in Genesis 12 through chapters 36. Chapter 12, you have the Abrahamic covenant that is repeated several times. This is where God said, "It is through you, Abraham, that I will make a great nation, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through your seed." Obviously, we know the ultimate seed was Jesus. And he has blessed, all the peoples of the world have been blessed because of Jesus. Not necessarily because they've accepted him, but he has brought redemption and the possibility of redemption through the world. But the section that we're in right now is my favorite section. I know creation is obviously, and the fall, all of that's intriguing. But and the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are intriguing. There's a lot of good stuff there. But I love the life of Joseph. And so starting in chapter 37, we have been studying the life of Joseph, and it will go on through chapter 50. And there is an interlude in those verses, or in those chapters, in chapter 38 about Judah. And so, but tonight we have already seen the reunion, even though they don't know. We've seen the famine has affected the Jacob and his family, and they have made one trip to Egypt. And tonight we're going to talk about this second trip, and I've entitled the lesson tonight, "A Change of Heart, Taking Responsibility." And we're going to learn how one of the brothers really had a change of heart. And we're going to learn some lessons that I think will be extremely important that we can draw from. This is a narrative, and one of the things that's hard is to take a narrative and break it down with short verses. It's like reading, it would be like you opening a story and reading, halfway through a chapter and putting your book down. Even though you can do that and pick back up, it's not as easy to understand unless you read through the entire narrative. And so tonight we're going to read all 34 verses. Okay, it doesn't take long, but we won't explain each verse. There's just some general principles that we'll talk about in this. And so in verse 1 it says, "And the famine was sore in the land." One of the things that I like, and I love other versions, but one of the things I like when in stories like this is the King James Version can sometimes just make you really feel what's going on. When you talk about the famine was sore in the land. You ever been sore? You ever been sore after a hard day's work? You know what that feels like. Well, they were sore because of a famine, not necessarily physically sore, but they were sore. It had affected them. They were affected by this famine. And it says in verse 2, "And it came to pass, when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, Go again, and buy us a little food. And Judah spake unto him, saying, The man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. He's asking for Benjamin. This is Joseph. Joseph said, if you don't bring your brother, they didn't know who Joseph was. They didn't recognize him. Remember, this was probably 20 years when they had sold him. So whatever it was, whether he had a deep suntan or something had changed about his features, we don't know. But they didn't know him. They had not recognized him yet. And they probably would not have thought that he was a Hebrew. They would have thought he was an Egyptian. But he wasn't, and so he had told them, if you don't bring your brother, don't let me see your face again if you don't bring your brother with you. And so, if thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. And Israel said, Jacob, Wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? And they said, The man asked us straitly of our state and of our kindred, saying, Is your father yet alive? Have you another brother? And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, Bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. You know, when you're hungry and there's a famine, you'll do whatever is necessary. They did not see the providence and God's hand in this yet, but they were desperate for their family. And I want you to keep that in mind. Verse 9. I will be surety for him, of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. And their father Israel said unto them, If it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and carry down the man a present, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, and the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go again unto the man. And God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand and Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, Bring these men home, and slay, and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, Because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may seek occasion against us, and fall upon us, and take us for bondmen and our asses. And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass, when we came to the end, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And he said, Peace be to you, fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given your treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. And the man brought the men unto Joseph's house, and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. And they made ready the present against Joseph, came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves to him to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare, and said, Is your father well, the old man of whom you spake? Is he yet alive? I'm going to stop there. This is Joseph's dream coming true. This is his vision. That's one of the things that made them mad. Because he had told them earlier in their life, I dreamed that you were going to bow before me. It's happening. And so, verse 28, and they answered the servant, thy servant, our father, is in good health. He is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother, of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother. And he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat down before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest therefore to his youth, and the men marveled one at another. And he took and sent messes unto them before him, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. Can you imagine the emotion? I mean, here's Joseph having to keep his emotion in check. He sees his young brother. I mean, just think about this. Here are his brothers before him, a few of them who had much more of a hand in throwing him into the pit and even, having him sold and leaving him, and even telling the father that he was dead. So by way of introduction, I want to just tell you 2 or 3 things. When was this? Joseph was about 17 when he went to Egypt. He was about 30 when he became a ruler in Egypt. And then the 7 years of abundance foretold in Pharaoh's dream in Genesis 41 had passed, and now the 7 years of famine. Remember, Joseph was wise. He had gone from Potiphar's house. He was imprisoned over false accusations. He prospered in prison. God showed favor to him. Pharaoh was told that he could interpret dreams, and Pharaoh's dreams in chapters 41 were interpreted, and Joseph was set as the number 1 person in Egypt other than Pharaoh. This was a Hebrew. And so the famine had begun, and these events occurred at least 20 years after Joseph was sold as a slave. The main characters in this passage are Joseph. This is Jacob's son with Rachel, and in this chapter, he's the second most powerful man in Egypt. You have Joseph's 10 brothers. They were sold into slavery. They sold Joseph into slavery when he was 17. That's in Genesis 42. And they traveled to Egypt to buy food during this famine. Joseph had the wisdom to fill the Egyptian coffers up during the 7 years of plenty so that he could pretty much sell to the world, including his own family. And they returned to Egypt this second time to buy food in Genesis 43. You have Benjamin, who is Joseph's 11th brother, the only other son of Jacob and Rachel. And then you have Jacob, the father of Joseph and his brothers, and he was the son of Isaac and husband of Rachel and Leah. So we see the characters. Where are they? Joseph's brothers traveled from Canaan to Egypt to buy food during a famine, and we're not really told where exactly in Egypt that Joseph was located. So there's really 2 sections of Genesis chapter 43. The first section is that Jacob relents and allows Benjamin to go to Egypt. That is in the first 14 verses. The famine in Canaan was severe. They were running out of food. Jacob told his sons to return to Egypt, but he was reluctant to let Benjamin go because he already thought one son was dead. He already thought one son was dead. He couldn't take the thought of another son, losing another son. And they told their father they couldn't return, which Joseph had told them that. He's second in charge. And in the known world at that time, you did not go against a Pharaoh or his second in command. It could mean death just by a spoken word. And so Jacob told his sons, you need to go buy more food. And they said, we can't go empty-handed. We have to take Benjamin. The man in charge told us that we had to bring, if our brother didn't come, then we better not show our face. And it was also to prove that they weren't spies. And so Judah told his father that he would be responsible for Benjamin's safety. By the way, it's pretty clear that Judah might have been the main one in charge of selling or putting Joseph in the pit and that whole plot. Now, I want you to watch how this brother that was envious and that was just conniving about Joseph, who they were very jealous of and were mad at. I mean, let me ask you, how many of you have siblings? Okay? What would you think if your sibling said, you know, I had a dream, God gave me a dream, and you're going to bow to me one day? So the thing is, we don't need to get all over these guys. They were mad. Now what the action they took was not good. But I can understand it. I can't imagine my brother or sister going, well, we had a dream, and one of these days you're going to bow, and you're going to bow in front of us. I mean, that'd make me mad. And I know it made them mad as the baby of the family if I'd have told them that. And so Joseph agreed to let Benjamin go. And he told his sons to take a present of fruit, balm, honey, gum, myrrh, pistachios is one translation, and almonds to the governor. He told them to take double money to pay the money back they found in their sacks after their last visit. Look, there's all kinds of things that could have gone wrong in this story. They could have been accused of thievery. I mean, it was just they were scared half to death. And yet, you know, some people say Joseph was a little bit too conniving and sort of hard on them, but there was a purpose, and we'll see that purpose as we move toward the end of Genesis. But here's the second section. In verses, that really covers the first 14 verses. 15 through 34, you have Joseph's brothers are invited to his house. Now we're getting ready to have a reveal. Not in chapter 43. You got to come back next week. Okay? You got Joseph's brothers are invited to his house. The brothers traveled to Egypt and were told to wait in Joseph's house. That could have caused all kinds of concern for them. They feared they were going to be made the governor's servants, so they approached his steward and started explaining their situation and how they brought double the amount of money to pay for the grain from their last visit. So they're already in a panic mode. They're explaining their situation. They don't want to be servants of Pharaoh. They want to be able to go back to Jacob. They want to have freedom. They had no clue. And so the steward of Joseph's house told them not to worry. He already knew about the money and it was no concern. The steward then brought them to Joseph's house, washed their feet, gave them water, and cared for their donkeys. And at noon, Joseph arrived and greeted them. They gave him the present from Jacob, and he asked about their father's health. I want you to think, 20 years he's wondered if his daddy was alive. You know, I'm not sure, I can't prove this, but I'm not sure that death wouldn't have been better than that, emotionally. Not in reality, but emotionally. Because he'd at least known, my dad has passed. But here he had to wonder. He wondered where his family was. Is my dad alive? Is he healthy? Will I ever see him again? That's got to be torture. And try to put yourself in the story tonight. So Joseph greeted Benjamin warmly, but he had to rush out of the room because he became emotional. Here's his baby brother, seeing him for the first time in 20 years. And after returning, the food was served. Joseph and the Egyptians ate separately because it was considered an abomination for Egyptians to eat with the Hebrews. The brothers were seated in order of their birth, which shocked them, and they were served food from Joseph's table. Benjamin received 5 times as much food as his 10 brothers. And that's the story. Now, we could go home right now and just say, well, that's the story. And sometimes when you read a narrative like that, you go, well, what am I supposed to learn from that? Oh, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn. And some of this will cross over. We will see more of the story, but here's some things that we need to really think about. First of all, people change over time. Here's some just little practical things. Now, I'm going to give you some things tonight that are a little different than the big picture. We know what the big picture is. The big picture is the bloodline of the Messiah is being preserved. We know that. But there's a lot of little things. You know, we're seeing Joseph act like Christ acted with us. You know, we can see those big pictures. But here's some little things. First of all, people change over time. God was using this situation, just like He would in our lives, to soften the heart of Joseph's brothers. People change. And here's what one of the things that we can do when we deal with others, and especially who have wronged us. You know, Joseph could have easily just had their heads. He was powerful enough to do that, but he didn't. How many times have you just written somebody off because they wronged you? I'll never do that again. I'll never hang out with them again. I'll never talk to them again. We are so quick just to brush people off. Joseph had every right. Joseph had every reason to look at his brothers and say, put them in jail, I don't want anything to do with them. They cost me 20 years of my life, and that's not what he did. People change over time. I have a feeling, and especially it will be revealed when the great reveal is given, I have a feeling that just like when you and I do something, those brothers, I do not believe, lived at peace throughout their lifetime every moment of the day. There had to be, as God's people, had to be something about them, and we will see some of that wondered about their brother, that felt guilty and shame of what they did. When they would see their father, you know, I can remember, did any of you have parents that it just ate you alive when you know you did something to hurt them? I just know what the Spirit of God does now in my own heart and in your heart. I know that there were times that when Jacob was bereaved, that those brothers had to think about when they tricked him into thinking that Joseph was dead. And so we need to be anxious to observe new maturity in somebody's life. Don't cut people off. Joseph would have never, listen, some of this is insinuated. Again, Joseph was a powerful leader in Egypt. We have to assume that God did something in his heart toward his brothers for him to behave the way he did toward them. Now, he spoke harshly with them in the first visit, and God used that. God still was using that. And I think there was a plan and a purpose. I don't think that Joseph necessarily wanted to do that or that was an evil scheme, but it was something God used to bring about some tenderness and some softness, some softening of his brothers' hearts. Here's another thing. It is easy to write a person off because you had a bad experience with them, but we need to remember that over time people grow, they mature, and they become more like Jesus. Now we know that sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't. We know nobody bats 1,000. But Joseph probably saw something in these brothers. He saw fear. He saw humility. He even saw obedience. He saw obedience. And Joseph could have, and I know what you may be thinking tonight, especially if you know this story well. You know, why would we not make the main focus what God was trying to do to go ahead and perpetuate Old Testament history? Because that's easy. That's an easy one. We know what God did. He's always done that. You say, why did God do this? And why did God do that? And why did he destroy the nations? And, why did he let the heathen rage? Why did he punish his people? God has always done what would bring him the greatest glory, and he will still do that. He will always do what brings him the greatest glory. Because it's all about him. It's not all about us. And so Joseph could have written them off and said, I will never give them another chance. They don't deserve another chance. They have lied to Dad. They treated me with terrible disrespect. And let me just go back and say this too. Don't forget that some of their feelings were because Joseph had been shown favor. Your kids may be different, but don't show them favor. Don't show favor one over another. You have to love them the same. You have to treat them the same. Because you can cause resentment in other people when you treat others better than you treat somebody else. And we can't ignore that God uses difficult situations. God used this famine. God used the famine to soften their hearts. God used this situation of want. They probably had never been in this kind of situation. They were in Canaan. Canaan was the land flowing with milk and honey. Canaan was the promised land. But now it was racked with famine. But here's the last one. It was Judah who proposed the idea of selling Joseph to the Ishmaelite slave traders in Genesis 27:26. But in this chapter, we see him taking responsibility for the safety of Benjamin. Now, we could draw a lot of conclusions that are not in black and white in Genesis 43. So let's just have a little discussion. You think Judah, is it possible that Judah had grown up a little bit? Is it possible that he said, man, I didn't do right by my brother, but I'm going to do right by this one? Or do you think he was just a knothead who was hungry and decided, I'm going to do what I need to get food? See, I don't think we find that answer in Genesis 43, but I do think we find it between Genesis 43 and the rest of the book. But how do you think a story like this should affect us? Let's talk about that a little bit. We don't have a whole lot of time, but we got some time to discuss. Oh man, don't shut down on me now.
I said definitely be forgiven.
Okay.
Like you said, Joseph could have just said, officer heads.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's never too late to make amends for things that's happened in the past.
Yeah. Remember this, and I promise you, I don't even know your situations unless you've shared them with me. But I don't have anybody in mind tonight. But let me tell you something. I believe it is an affront to God for us to just give up on relationships and say we can never make amends as long as both parties are still breathing. And I don't mean just family relationships. I know we're dealing with the family of Jacob right now. I'm talking about your church relationships. I'm talking about your work relationships. Yes, your family relationships. And I realize that everybody in the party has to be agreeing to it. I get that. But man, we're quick to write people off when they hurt us, when they wrong us. And Joseph could have done that. I think at this point we learn more from Joseph than we do the brothers, but we will learn from the brothers. And Joseph saw something. Look, Joseph did not need them. Joseph didn't need anything from them. Joseph, there was only one powerful man that was over him in the whole world, at that time, the Egyptians were absolutely in control, and it was Pharaoh. Joseph didn't need them. In fact, Joseph could have just given them food, not even done anything bad to them. He could have just given them food and said, go back home and be done with them. But it was family. And I want to remind us tonight that your blood family is not your only family. Your blood family is not your only family. You have a spiritual family that is much larger than your blood family could ever be. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know who said it. Maybe it was in Grow Group Sunday. My wife and I have lived knowing that the only family we had was our church family that was within an earshot of when we were in need. We didn't have family close. Some of you don't. Your church family, the body of Christ is a greater body of family than any blood family could ever be. And we sometimes are so quick to write each other off when we have, look, I love, and I know I'm going to pick on him tonight, and he didn't ask me to say this, but one of the things that I loved about in-service is our principal, Vince, got up in front of the faculty and staff and said, I'm going to talk to you about Matthew 18. When we have wronged each other, there is a way to restore it. There is a way to restore relationships. Now, I know Joseph didn't know anything about Matthew 18, but we do. And what we do many times is we spend a lot of time talking about and around each other instead of to each other. And Joseph eventually, as God led him, decided, I'm just going to hit this head on. I'm going to show them who I am. I'm going to do everything in my power to restore this and make it right. And man, I love the rest of Genesis because what God did in that family and what God did through Joseph, I believe was a direct result of what he was willing to do with his family. Now, in a narrative like this, you may have got something totally different. There's a whole bunch of lessons here. So we have, it's never too late. We have forgiveness. What else? What else comes to mind? I guess those are the two big ones. We can just call it a night, right? Obedience. Anybody else? I'm sorry, say that again. Yeah, I mean, Joseph wasn't looking. I don't even know that Joseph at that time was thinking about what they did to him. Somewhere he had moved past some of this. He knew it. By the way, you can move past something that you will never get over or never forget. Forgetting is a really bad piece of advice. People say, well, if you really forgive, you forget. No, you don't. In fact, that's not even the definition of forgiveness. Your brain don't give you the capacity to forget some things. Some things will always be with you. The hurt can be so deep. You think Joseph didn't know what they did to him? He absolutely knew. He absolutely knew they betrayed him. He knew that, probably came to his mind, but that's not what he acted on. He had moved past that enough to be able to go, I can choose the right thing now, even though they didn't choose it then. I mean, all of us have gone through things. One of the best books I ever read after all of our hurt was Getting Past What You'll Never Get Over. There's some things that will always be a part of the DNA of our lives, but I can't live in that. I'll never be effective in any way if I live in that constantly. That happens in family cycles. That happens in church life. Churches go through deep hurt. We just going to live in that? You're going to live in that? Families go through deep hurt. You're going to live in it? And by the way, sometimes it is reconciled and sometimes it's not. But the only person you can do anything about is you. You can't, look, to stay bitter at somebody is like you taking a glass of poison and drinking it, waiting on the other person to die. And all it does is make you more bitter. Somebody else. Patience. A lot of patience here. In fact, on Joseph's end, it was 20 years. He didn't know if he'd ever come to this day. He didn't know that. Unless he really believed his dream. We don't know at 17 or 16 if he thought that was just a wacky dream or he really believed that God gave it to him and that would happen. We really don't know what his mindset was. He just had the dream and told it to his brothers, and they were not happy. What else?
So we just finished up with Romans 8:28 Bible study, and this is one of a million perfect examples.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why, what God's plan is, right? And why he was sold into slavery. But look, he saved his entire family through this family.
Well, and let's go back to chapter 42 and verse 36. Notice what Jacob said. And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have you bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, so he thought Joseph was dead. And Simeon is not. He didn't know what was going on with Simeon. And you will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. By the way, that's exactly the mindset sometimes we get in. Oh, these things are against me. My life's falling apart. Everything's against me. Nothing is for me. Listen, if God be for us, nothing is against us. And Jacob's life and that statement was a modern day opportunity to teach him a principle of Romans 8:28, and he eventually learns it, even though Romans 8:28 wasn't written. All those things weren't against him. Everything that he had gone through helped perpetuate the importance of Old Testament history, taking us all the way to the coming of the Messiah. Some of the stuff would have never happened had they not experienced what they experienced. Same thing with you. I'm probably building a sermon here that I don't need to preach tonight. But I will tell you this. We want to identify with Jesus when it comes to the power of the resurrection. But we have to remember that Paul said, I want to know him two ways. I want to know him in the power of his resurrection, but I also want to know him in the fellowship of his suffering. And you are never closer to the Lord Jesus Christ than when you are going through suffering. He was the suffering Savior. All things did work together for good for Jacob and his family. Even though in Genesis 42, Jacob couldn't see it. By the way, sometimes we can't see it. And God continues to work. God could have cut him off right there and said, I'm tired of your bickering. I'm tired of your complaining. I'm tired of you not recognizing that I am your God and not trusting that I will bring you through this. But God did not do that. He was long suffering. So we don't just learn about Joseph and his brothers. We learn a whole lot. And this is what we've been saying all along. The Bible is a book about God, not about the characters of the Bible. God is revealing to us who He is, His character, what He does. And here He's showing a lot of long suffering and grace and mercy, and He's granting forgiveness, and He's moving in Joseph's heart, and He's moving in those brothers' heart. And for Judah to be the one that sort of orchestrated Joseph's demise, seeming demise, he also was the one that said, I'll take care of Benjamin. There was some maturity there. There was some maturity there. And yeah, it could have been some fear and all that, but God uses all of that. God uses all of that. He's taking responsibility. What else?
With the maturity, though, it's kind of surprising, and I say that because Israel showed
Yeah.
Their maturity.
Well, and we haven't even talked about, it's been since chapter 39 when Joseph was part of Potiphar's house. I mean, think about all that Joseph went through. False accusations, imprisonments, all kinds of things. And Joseph could have said, God's not who he said he was, but yet he didn't. Joseph had really matured. And I think his brothers had. And here's the thing, human nature tends to look at people and in a way that we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. But that's not what we see here. Again, just this whole thing. And then I can't wait to get to what I call the big reveal, when he finally realizes and helps them understand, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother. And just the reunion is unbelievable. Anything else? This is what I saw here, but it's not the only things, and we've already seen some of you. Anything else? Anything else just pop out at you that you go, well, this is what this meant to me. This is what I see here. No, really. Well, I guess there could be a wrong answer. There's probably not. If it speaks to you, then share it. Anybody else? I've always wondered if I have just covered it so well that I just need to stop, or whether you're just really ready to go home. And it's probably a little mixture of both, and that's okay too.
Just tagging along on Matthew 8:28, I was thinking the same thing. I think Joseph, in the end, realized that all the bad that happened to him was for this purpose of saving his family.
Yeah.
And it increased his faith.
I think so. And I think we're going to see that all the way to chapter 50. We're going to see it all the way to chapter 50. I hope I can tell. I probably should read it, but it's my understanding there was you know what? I'll read it next week. I want to make sure I get it right. And if I try to tell it, I'll leave something out, and it'll just be a big flop. So, but it has to do with when we sometimes think everything's working against us, and it's not. What is it tonight in your life that seems to be working against you? Try to remember that God is still writing your story. God is still writing your story. He hasn't closed the chapter on you yet. He hasn't closed the book. And I know that's hard. I wish I could sit here and tell you tonight that when we go through things that we don't understand, that it's easy, or that human relationships are easy. They're not. If you're going to love like Jesus, it is risky. It is risky. Relationships are risky. They're fickle. I read an article this week that reminded me of that. In 36 years, I've built a lot of relationships. And a lot of them are still intact, and a lot of people walked away. That's painful. It's painful. And I'm not telling you anything. I'm not telling you that for you to pat me on the back, because the truth is you've lived through that too. If you've lived any life at all, you've lived through that too. When you have poured your life into people, and there's been times that I wasn't right, that I even went back and said, you know what, I am so sorry, please forgive me, and they would not. They were, and years later, sometimes years later, they come and go, you know what, I was just crazy. I should have accepted your apology then. There's been much more good than bad, but we've all experienced those things where, forgiveness and patience and some understanding and some grace and some mercy You know, here's one I think about when I think about relationships. Now, there's a whole lot more than just relationships in this story, but here's one I think about. I don't think Paul was in the right when he didn't want John Mark to go with him. I've never, everybody talks about, well, Paul was just mature and he knew he didn't need to go. I just don't agree with that. And the Lord may set me straight one of these days. In fact, if I'm wrong, I know he will. But until the Lord tells me I'm wrong, it doesn't matter. I believe I'm right on that one. I believe Paul was stubborn. I believe he had a little bit of arrogance and pride. And I believe that John Mark, you know, maybe made a mistake by leaving them somewhere, you know, in another place they were in. But Barnabas had a different personality, and he was willing to hang on to John Mark. But Paul matured, and I believe John Mark matured too, because guess what? Later in his ministry, Paul said, bring John Mark with you. He is profitable to me. Amen. If me and Thurman agree, that's it. But I've known people to say, you know, Paul was right. He should have left him in the dust. I just don't agree with that. Absolutely. But there had to be some forgiveness. There had to be some maturity. There had to be some grace, some patience. It's not that Paul may not have been right in his assessment of John Mark, but I don't believe he was right in his treatment of John Mark. John Mark may have been immature. John Mark may have never should have left them. Maybe he was a young, you know, well, he was young. He was a young believer. By the way, don't judge other believers based on your level of maturity. Judge them, or don't judge them at all. Accept them and bring them into your life based on what you see they could be if they would walk with Christ. There's a song that I used to sing. I can't find the track anymore. And the last time I sang it, it was on a cassette. So that'll tell you how long ago that's been. But it said something like this, and I hope I can remember. Let me see this world, dear Lord, as though I am looking through your eyes. A world of men who despise you, Lord, but a world for whom you died. And he goes on, for if once I could see the world the way you see, I know I would live more patiently. And I think that's what Joseph did. Joseph matured, maybe Judah matured as his treatment of Benjamin. The whole play, it was all in God's providence. Did God want there to be a separation in the family? No, it is never God's will for things bad to happen, but He does allow it, and then He can work through it. All of this was caused by free will choices. You do understand that. But God can even work with our dumb, erratic, ignorant, uninformed, stubborn choices. He can work through all of it. And He did in this situation. And if you'll come back next week, we'll learn together some really good stuff about how God used as we move closer to this reunion. And again, read it some more this week. Don't let this be the last time you look at Genesis 42 or 43, and you might want to go back and read 42. And some of you that haven't been with us, you might want to refresh your memory and just go all the way back to 39 and start reading and see what we've covered. But good stuff tonight, and I hope that you will find yourself pondering and asking the Lord to even teach you some other things that maybe we didn't cover tonight. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the narratives of the Bible that are true stories where you teach us about yourself. We've talked a lot about Joseph and the other characters, but Lord, we want to end tonight by talking about you.